Hey everyone, Father Scott Vanderveer here with another installment of our series Rediscover Jesus. Today, I am wrestling with the question, what parts of my life do I make off limits to God? I was reading a very beautiful and challenging book called Sacred Fire by an oblate of Mary Immaculate, a priest of this Canadian religious order, which is actually international, but he comes from Saskatchewan and now is a professor and rector of a seminary program down in San Antonio, Texas, Father Ronald Rolheiser. He, in the book Sacred Fire, offers a very challenging image that is one that makes me stop and think and may also work effectively on your spiritual thought process. He says, if your life were a mansion that had 100 rooms in it, how many rooms would you let God into? And how many rooms of your mansion would you want off limits to God? What a question that is. How many rooms in your mansion, if there were 100, would be for God, and how many would you restrict God from? It's a complicated question because we may find that there's parts of our lives that are not in order, and the reason we don't want God there is that we don't want God to see that. Or maybe we're keeping God out of certain rooms of our lives because we want to hold ourselves to a standard that is easier to bear than the one we assume God would hold us to. Maybe we are keeping God out of one of those rooms because we always feel that we can't relax if we know God is watching us. And we want to have a place that's just for us to act however we wish. Whatever it is, it's a fascinating question. And I find that most of the people I've ever had this conversation with, if they're willing to be upfront and honest about it and don't just change the subject, they'll admit that for some reason, maybe for a reason that's hard to put our fingers on, we don't want God to be in all of the rooms of our mansion. We want some of the rooms of our mansion to be off limits, or maybe just for us. And I know that in this conversation I had with one person, the thought came up that if God were asking for our last maybe 5 rooms, maybe we got to the point in our life where we gave 95 of our rooms to God. If God asked us for the last 5 rooms, give me the key to those last 5 rooms. In the conversation, we talked about the feeling, but then where do we get to live in the house? And in that conversation, we could hear God saying, well, you'd live with me, of course. We would share the house together. We don't have to trade places in order to live. We don't need to live separate lives. I'm not asking for 95% of your house so that I can rattle around in there alone and give you just 5%. I want to share the whole house with you. I want us to occupy the whole house together. My friend, who's the mother of 8 kids, a very wise woman, she is a spiritual director and a church employee and has lots of other interests too, including horses and breeding dogs and living on a homestead. Anyway, she said that she's wanted her job as a mother to be an effort at impressing her kids that God does not need to be the number one priority in our life. God instead needs to be the center of every priority. Can you feel how different that is? God doesn't want to be number one on a list of things that's important to us. Because if God were number one on the list, we could check God off. Good, got God taken care of. Now I can move on to other things. But Diane wants her kids to know God doesn't want to be left behind when you do any of those other things. God is not asking to be number one, like the big kahuna, like it's a power trip. God wants to be at the center of everything. And there's that old Irish saying, bidden or not bidden, God is present. Whether we invite God in or whether we say, no, God, sorry, God is going to be there. There's no way to edge God out of our lives. So we're going to have to figure God in. And we're going to have to figure out how we can be better at lowering those barbed wire fences that we put around certain parts of our life. Because God doesn't just want to be a big priority in our life. God wants to be in the middle of all of it. May God bless you all.